IELTS Reading Out Loud, Day 2. The mega fire of California. Drought, housing expansion, and oversupply of timber makes for bigger, hotter fires in the western United States. Wildfires are becoming an increasing menace in the western United States, with Southern California being the hardest hit area. There's a reason fire squads battling more frequent blazes in Southern California are having such difficulty containing the flames despite better preparedness than ever and decades of experience fighting fire fanned by the Santa Ana winds. The wildfires themselves, experts say, are generally hotter, faster, and spread more erratically than in the past. Megafires, also called siege fires, are the increasingly frequent blazes that burn 500,000 acres or more, 10 times the size of the average forest fire of 20 years ago. Some recent wildfires are among the biggest ever in California in terms of acreage burned, according to state figures and news reports. One explanation for the trend to more super hot fires is that the region, which usually has dry summers, has had significantly below normal precipitation in many recent years. Another reason, experts say, is related to the country-long policy of the U.S. Forest Service to stop wildfires as quickly as possible. The unintentional consequence has been to halt the natural eradication of underbrush, now the primary fuel for mega fires. 3 other factors contribute to the trend, they add. First is climate change, marked by a 1 degree Fahrenheit rise in average yearly temperature across the western states. Second is fire reasons that on average are 78 days longer than they were 20 years ago. Third is increased construction of homes and wooded areas. We are increasingly building our homes in fire-prone ecosystems, says Dominik Kulakovsky, adjunct professor of biology at Clark University Graduate School of Geography in Worcester, Massachusetts. Doing that in many of the forests of the western US is like building homes on the side of an active volcano. In California, where population growth has averaged more than 600,000 a year for at least a decade, more residential housing is being built. What once was open space is now residential homes, providing fuel to make fires burn with greater intensities, says Terry McHale of the California Department of Forestry Firefighters Union. With so much dryness, so many communities to catch fire, so many fronts to find, it becomes an almost incredible job. That said, many experts give California high marks for making progress on preparedness in recent years. After some of the largest fires in state history scorched thousands of acres, burned thousands of homes, and killed numerous people. Stung in the past by criticism of bungling that allowed fires to spread when they might have been contained, personnel are meeting the peculiar challenges of neighborhood and canyon, hoping fires better than previously, observers say. State promises to provide more up-to-date engines, planes, and helicopters to fight fires have been fulfilled. Firefighters unions that in the past complained of dilapidated dilapidated equipment, old fire engines, and insufficient blueprints for fire safety are now praising the state's commitment, noting that funding for firefighting has increased despite huge cuts in many other programs. We are pleased that the current state administration has been very proactive in its support of us and has come through with budgetary support of the infrastructure needs we have long sought, says Mr. Mikhail of the Firefighters Union. Besides providing money to upgrade the fire engines that must traverse the mammoth state and win along serpentine canyon roads, the state has invested in better command and control facilities as well as the strategies to run them. In the fire siege of earlier years, we found that other jurisdictions and states were willing to offer mutual aid help, but we were not able to communicate adequately with them, says Kim Zagaris, chief of the state's Office of Emergency Service Fire and Rescue Branch. After a commission examined and revamped communications After a commission examined and revamped communications procedures, the statewide response has become more professional and responsive, he says. There's a sense among both government officials and residents at the speed, dedication, and coordination of firefighters from several states and jurisdiction are resulting in greater efficiency than in past siege fire situations. In recent years, the Southern California region has improved building codes, evacuation procedures, and procurement of new technology. I am extraordinarily impressed by the improvements we have witnessed, says Randy Jacobs, a Southern California-based lawyer who has had to evacuate both his home and business to escape wildfires. Notwithstanding all the damage that will continue to be caused by wildfires, we will no longer suffer the loss of life endured in the past because of the fire prevention and firefighting measures that have been put in place, he says. Reading passage 2. Second nature. Your personality isn't necessarily set in stone. With a little experimentation, people can reshape their temperaments and inject passions, optimism, joy, and courage into their lives. Psychologists have long held that a person's character cannot undergo a transformation in any meaningful way, and that the key traits of personality are determined at a very young age. However, researchers have begun looking more closely at ways we can change. Positive psychologists have identified 24 qualities we admire, such as loyalty and kindness, and are studying them to find out why they come so naturally to some people. What they are discovering is that many of these qualities amount to habitual behavior that determines the way we respond to the world. The good news is that all this can be learned. Some qualities are less challenging to develop than others, optimism being one of them. However, developing qualities requires mastering a range of skills which are diverse and sometimes surprising. For example, to bring more joy and passion into your life, you must be open to experiencing negative emotions. negative emotions. Cultivating such qualities will help you realize your full potential. The evidence is good that most personality traits can be altered, says Christopher Peterson, professor of psychology at the University of Michigan, who cites himself as an example. Inherently introverted, he realized early on that as an academic, his reticence would prove disastrous in the lecture hall, so he learned to be more outgoing and to entertain his classes. Now my extroverted behavior is spontaneous, he says. David Fajabom had to make a similar transition. He was preparing for university when he had an accident that put an end to his sports career. On campus, he quickly found that beyond ordinary counseling, the university had no services for students who were undergoing physical. On campus, he quickly found that beyond ordinary counseling, the university had no services for students who were undergoing physical rehabilitation. Oh my god.
Rehabilitation.
On campus, he quickly found that beyond ordinary counseling, the university had no. Oh my god. Okay, let's start again. David Fajgenbaum had to make a similar transition. He was preparing for university when he had an accident that put an end to his sports career. On campus, he quickly found that beyond ordinary counseling, the university had no services for students who were undergoing physical rehabilitation and suffering from depressions like him. He therefore launched a support group to help others in similar situations. He took actions despite his own pain, a typical response of an optimist. Susan Segerstrom, professor of psychology at the University of Kentucky, believes that the key to increasing optimism is through cultivating optimistic behaviors rather than positive thinking. He recommends you train yourself to pay attention to good fortune by writing down 3 positive things that come about each day. This will help you convince yourself that favorable outcomes actually happens all the time, making it easier to begin taking action. You can recognize a person who is passionate about a pursuit by the way they are so strongly involved in it. Tanya Streeter's passion is free diving, the sport of plunging deep into the water without tanks or other breathing equipment. Beginning in 1898, she set 9 world records and can hold her breath for 6 minutes. The physical stamina required for this sport is intense, but the psychological demands are even more overwhelming. Streeter learned to untangle her fears from the judgment of what her body and mind could do. In my career as a competitive free diver, there was no limit to what I could do, but it wasn't anywhere near what I thought it was, she says. Finding a pursuit that excites you can improve anyone's life. The secret about consuming passions, though, according to psychologist Paul Sylvia of the University of North Carolina, is that they require discipline, hard work, and ability which is why they are so rewarding. Psychologist Todd Kashdan has this advice for those people taking up a new passion. As a newcomer, you also have to tolerate and laugh at your own ignorance. You must be willing to accept the negative feelings that come your way, he says. In 2004, physician scientist Mauro Zapatera began his PhD research at Harvard Medical School. Unfortunately, he was miserable as his research wasn't compatible with his curiosity about healing. He finally took a break, and during 8 months in Santa Fe, Zapatera learned about his alternative healing techniques not taught at Harvard. When he got back, he switched labs to study how cerebrospinal fluid how cerebrospinal fluid nourishes the development of nervous system. He also vowed to look for the joy in everything, including failure, as this could help him learn about his research and himself. One thing that can hold joy back is a person's concentration on avoiding failure rather than they're looking forward to doing something well. Focusing on being safe might get in the way of your researching goals, explains Kashdan. For example, are you hoping to get through a business lunch without embarrassing yourself, or are you thinking about how fascinating the conversation might be? Usually we think of courage in physical terms, but ordinary life demands something else. For marketing executives, Pedalose, it meant speaking out against something he thought was ethically wrong. The new manager was intimidating staff, so Pedaleos carefully recorded each instance of bullying and eventually took the evidence to the senior director, knowing his own job security would be threatened. Eventually, the manager was the one to go. According to Cynthia Puri, a psychologist at Clemson University, Pedaleos' story proves the point that courage is not motivated by fearlessness, but by moral obligation. Puri also believes that people can acquire courage. Many of her students say that faced with a risky situation, they first tried to calm themselves down, then looked for a way to mitigate the danger, just as Pedaleos did by documenting his allegations. Over the long term, picking up a new character trait may help you move towards the person you want to be, and in the short term, the effort itself could be surprisingly rewarding, a kind of internal adventure. Wow. Scratchy. Part 3. When evolution runs backwards. Evolution isn't supposed to run backwards, yet an increasing number of examples show that it does, and that it can sometimes represent the future of a species. The description of any animal as an evolutionary throwback is controversial. For the better part of the century, most biologists have been reluctant to use those words, mindful of a principle of evolution that says evolution cannot run backwards. But as more and more examples comes to line and modern genetics enters the scene, that principle is having to be rewritten. Not only are evolutionary throwbacks possible, they sometimes play an important role in the forward march of evolution. The technical term for an evolution throwback is atavism. Atavism, from the Latin of atavus, meaning forefather. The word has ugly connotations thanks largely to Cesare Lombroso, a 19th century Italian medic who argued that criminals were born not made and criminals were born not made and could be identified by certain physical features that were throwbacks to primitive subhuman states. While Lombroso was measuring criminals, a Belgian paleontologist, oh my god, this word. I mean,
Paleontologist.
A Belgian paleontologist called Louis Dolo was studying fossils. Oh no. A Belgian paleontologist called Louis Dolo was studying fossils records. Oh my god. Was studying fossil records and coming to the opposite conclusion. In 1980, he proposed that evolution was irreversible, that an organism is unable to return and even partially to a previous stage already realized in the ranks of its ancestor. Early 20th century biologists came to a similar conclusion, though they qualified it in terms of probability, stating that there is no reason why evolution cannot run backwards. It is just very unlikely, and so the idea of irreversibility in evolution stuck and became to be known as Dolo's law. If Dolo's law is right, atavisms should occur only very rarely, if at all. Yet almost since the idea took root, exceptions have been cropping up. In 1919, for example, a humpback whale with a pair of leg-like appendages over a meter long, complete with a full set of limb bones, was caught off Vancouver Island in Canada. Explorer Roy Chapman Andrew argued at the time that the whale must be a throwback to a land-living ancestor. I can see no other explanation, he wrote in 1921. Since then, so many other examples have been discovered that it no longer makes sense to say that evolution is as good as irreversible. And this poses a puzzle. How can characteristics that disappeared millions of years ago suddenly reappear? In 1994, Rudolf Ruff and colleagues at Indiana University in the USA decided to use genetics to put a number of the probability of evolution going into reverse. They reasoned that while some evolutionary changes involve the loss of genes and are therefore irreversible, others may be results of genes being switched off. If these silent genes are somehow switched back on, they argued, long-lost traits could reappear. Ruff's team went on to calculate the likelihood of it happening. Silent genes accumulate random mutations, they reasoned, eventually rendering them useless. So how long can a gene survive in its species if it is no longer used? The team calculated that there is a good chance of silent genes surviving for up to 6 million years in at least a few individuals in a population, and that some might survive as long as 10 million years. In other words, throwbacks are possible, but only to the relatively recent evolutionary past. As a possible example, the team pointed to the mole salamanders of Mexico and California. Like most amphibians, these begin life in a juvenile tadpole state, then metamorphosed into, oh my god, this word. Metamorphosed into the adult form, except for one species, the axolotl, which famously lives in its entire life as a juvenile. The simplest explanation for this is that the axolotl lineage alone lost the ability to metamorphose, while others retained it. From a detailed analysis of the salamander's family tree, however, it is clear that the other lineages evolved from an ancestor that itself had lost the ability to metamorphose. In other words, metamorphosis is most salamanders is oh my god. In other words, metamorphosis in most salamanders is an atavism. The salamander example fits with Raph's 10 million year time frame. More recently, however, examples have been reported that break the time limit, suggesting that silent genes may not be the whole story. In a paper published last year, biologist Gunther Wagner of Yale University reported some work on the evolutionary history of a group of South American lizards called Bacchia. Many of these have minuscule limbs. Some look more like snakes than lizards, and a few completely lost the toes on their hind limbs. Other species, however, sport up to 4 toes on their hind legs. The simplest explanation is that the toad lineages never lost their toes, but Wagner begs to differ. According to his analysis of the Bacchia family tree, the toad species re-evolved toads from toeless ancestors, and what is more, digit loss and gain has occurred on more than one occasion over 10 million years. So what's going on? One possibility is that these traits are lost and then simply reappear, in much the same way that similar structures can independently arise in unrelated species, such as the dorsal fins of sharks and killer whales. Another more intriguing possibility is that the genetic information needed to make toes somehow survived for tens or perhaps hundreds of millions of years in the lizards and was reactivated. These atavistic traits provided an advantage and spread through the population, effectively reversing evolution. But if silent genes degrade within 6 million years, how can long-lost traits be activated over longer timescales? The answer may lie in the womb. Early embryos of many species develop ancestral features. Snake embryos, for example, sprout hind limb buds. Later in development, these features disappear thanks to developmental programs that say lose the leg. If for any reason this does not happen, the ancestral feature may not disappear, leading to an atavism. Oh my god, 30 minutes!